morning and welcome to Church 180. We are glad to have you with us this morning. We hope your new year is off to a great start and that the Lord is present with you, that you're aware of His presence, that you are aware of His blessing. And if for some reason you are having difficulty or struggling, as so many are today, we hope that our time in His Word, our time of discussion together about what He has done for us and what He is doing, what it means to be a disciple and to be a follower of His, we hope that will bless you and encourage you. We'd love to have you with us if you're looking for a church home, or if you just want to come and be a part of what God is doing with us, we'd love to have you. So we're going to continue our discussion this morning on discipleship, and as we talked about in our meeting, I thought maybe we could talk this morning a little bit about what does it mean to be a disciple? What does it actually mean? What does the word disciple mean? And rather than getting into a dictionary type explanation, which we can certainly do, I thought maybe we would come to the understanding or the idea of a disciple by doing like we do with a lot of things. When you don't know of a particular title or position, sometimes it's easiest just to watch somebody who is that, or to study, become aware of someone who is known by that particular title, and learn from that, rather than, again, just a dictionary type expression. So there's a couple of stories in Paul's letter to the Philippians that I want us to look at this morning. And again, the idea as we read through this is listen. If you can follow, we invite you to open up to Philippians chapter 2 this morning. We're going to be looking, I think it's verse 19 that we'll start with. We're talking about reading about two disciples, two men that were friends of the Apostle Paul. If I was going to hold somebody up, I've said this several months ago when we were talking about this idea. I said if you were going to study someone that really was an epitome of disciple, surely Paul would be on the list to study. But instead of Paul specifically, although we'll get some idea of him this morning as well, I want us to listen and focus on a couple of guys who were friends of his, and you might say disciples of his. Now that can be kind of a controversial statement to make, because you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, we're not supposed to be disciples of anybody else, just disciples of Jesus as Christians. And I get that. I understand that. And that's a true statement. But at the same time, there is an element of being a disciple, an element of being a follower, an element of being a student, an element of learning from, and kind of like an apprentice, just to throw out different words, that would apply to any of us following another human, another person that is also a disciple of the Lord. So ultimately, we're a disciple of Jesus, but we may participate in that learning and that growth by following others who are a little farther down the line than we are. So we're looking at Philippians chapter 2, verse 19. I don't know if we'll get all the way through 30 or not, but that's the possibility. So the passage. In particular, we're talking about Timothy, an easy name, a name that's still used in our culture, and then a name that's not so much used. Matter of fact, probably not ever used unless you happen to be from the Mediterranean. Epaphroditus. I was reading that name earlier, and I thought, there's a return. There's been a return to some older names lately, and oftentimes those names are shortened with a little nickname. I don't know exactly what Epaphroditus might have been abbreviated by, what his buddies might have called him in that day. But we're gonna look at these two guys this morning. Paul's writing to the Philippian church. Paul had a very close relationship to the Philippians. He really loved them for a variety of reasons. He's writing a letter to them, obviously not with them, and he's talking about some of the relationship that he has with them directly and through others. And it's a story. It's a story about a couple of his friends and their ministry as well. So I'll begin to read this morning Verse 19 says, and I'm reading out of the NIV. If it's a little different from your translation, you'll know why. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you, you being the Philippian church. I have no one else like him, Timothy, who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. So this is just a little brief passage about Timothy. It's obviously a bit of the story of what's going on, and he just kind of talks to the church at Philippians through his writing about Timothy. So I wondered this morning, as you heard that, or as you read through it again, what strikes you about Timothy as Paul is telling of this friend of his? What strikes you of him that might indicate what it means to be a disciple?
The first thing that jumps out is that he has genuine concern for others over himself.
Yeah. That's exactly right. What else? A genuine concern for the welfare of others, for the good of others.
Well, excuse me, obviously had a lot of love and respect, in that he served as a son.
Yeah.
Not as a servant or employee, but as a son.
Right.
Yeah, a loved one.
That's right. Timothy,
Yeah.
serving that way as to Paul,
Right,
in relationship
right.
to Paul. Yeah. And when you think of that, that's a great point. When you think of that, or any of you, what difference would it make in serving as a son versus serving as an employee or a servant? What difference would it make? In other words, when you think of those, that's a great example. It's a great way of describing it. If you were to think of a male yourself, a son, a friend of yours, and you were describing the way they served their parents as a son versus the way they served their employer. I don't mean to get people in trouble this morning, by the way, by calling that out. I'm saying that, and I'm hearing my dad say, well, now, wait a minute. What are your thoughts? I'll tell you some of the thoughts, the reason that I said that. I mean, obviously my dad, I am my dad's son. I'm my mom's son. And interesting, for a very brief period of time, summers when I was in college, I came home from college back to be with my parents, and I worked for one of the stores that my dad was responsible for. He was the overseer of it. And so for those brief summers, those periods of time, my dad was both dad and employer. I was both son and employee. Now, not directly, of course, but I can tell you there were some differences.
Well, one is you're working for a paycheck,
Yeah,
position, or promote, whatever,
sure.
other than respect and love for the person you're doing it with.
That's right.
Or for.
That's right. That's right. And hopefully you would have respect for your
Respect
employer,
would be fine, yeah.
which is why I said I can hear my dad saying, now, wait a minute, because I'm thinking that he would
But
be.
it's a different kind of
But it
respect.
is. It is it's a different sense of motivation.
Mhm.
Might that be a way of describing it?
It's a mindset shift toward your parents as opposed to your employer, from the perspective that your job description says, we'll hire you and we want you to do this, 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 and this, and this, and this.
Right.
As opposed to you're a son or a daughter to your parents, and you do things out of love.
Good point.
Respect as well, but
That's
you
right.
do them because you want to do them. You want to, I'm going to use the term bless.
Sure.
Not sure that goes through sons' minds or daughters' minds, but I want to do things that uplift
Yeah.
that assist, et cetera, as
Yeah.
opposed to, I gotta do this because it's my job.
That's right.
And I, can love what I do
Sure.
as a job, but it's completely different
Mhm.
than what you do for parents or for loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And not to go too far with this, but just to highlight what sometimes occurs. You may be familiar, maybe you've had this experience yourself, but sometimes in situations where somebody has not had the best home life and they happen to get connected to a coach, you often hear that. Or perhaps an employer, it could be. And they say things like, I'm going to keep using the males just for discussion's sake. Man, that guy was like a father to me. That guy was like, he really served in a father figure role to me. And what they're implying by that, if they haven't outright said it, is, I worked for him. I learned under him. I was loyal to him. I did what I did out of a slightly different, or perhaps very different, motivation. I may have been compelled to do it, but it wasn't because of a threat. It was because of a deep desire to bless or to benefit the person I was working for. Wow, we've not even gotten past the first verse here. But you're right. These are some of the things that you can identify in Timothy as hopeful in a disciple. Because a disciple, if you look just at what we've talked about, a disciple is one, whoever that is, he or she is a disciple of, they have a motivation out of being blessed, out of being cared for, out of being loved, and they want to return that. Right? One way of saying it. What else? What else do you pick up out of this passage of reading or hearing about Timothy that might inform you of why Paul is celebrating him?
Well, in 23, hopes to send him to you soon, depending on how things go with me. Obviously, he depended on him, needed him,
That's right.
and if he was going to share him, the people he was sending him to must be very special to him.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great point. There is a closeness of the relationship. There's a depending on, because apparently he could count on him. He knew that he was faithful. He talks about that. He implies that earlier when he says, for everyone, in verse 21, for everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself. So he does depend on him, and Timothy has proven himself trustworthy, reliable. Now, if we want to take it a step farther, how does this relationship between Timothy and Paul affect others? Take that same verse and let me open it up a little bit for you. Verse 23, I hope therefore to send him as soon as I see how to send him to the Philippians. To send him as soon as I see how things go with me. There's an obvious dependency and counting on, and maybe I'm not ready to. But Paul has this loving relationship with the Philippian church. He cares for them deeply. Perhaps they also, as you would know from reading elsewhere in this letter, you would know that they are also concerned. The Philippian church is concerned about Paul. And so Paul's wanting to send word. So he's holding up on Timothy so Paul can see how things are going with him, and Timothy can take that report. He can let them know how he's doing. What that speaks to me about, in terms of being a disciple, is that not only are you working for the benefit of somebody, you're serving on, and you're following them, you're wanting to bless them, you're loyal to them, but you're also loyal to the people they care about, to their purposes, their causes. And in this case, Timothy would obviously know of Paul's care and concern for the Philippian church. says something interesting, and I wonder if you can connect the two. Paul says in the beginning of this little brief story about Timothy, verse 19, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon. He ends this little part about Timothy in verse 24 by saying, I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. What's he saying? What is Paul saying about this repeated line or verse, in the Lord? I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy soon. I'm confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. What difference does it make about this in the Lord business? Do you know? Does that strike you? It's a little different wording. We don't typically say things like that today.
It's, I think, goes right back to the core of what you're pointing out. He's a disciple of Christ. When he says, I hope in the Lord, I'm confident in the Lord, his focus is up, not down.
Yeah.
It's not a worldly focus.
Yeah.
It's a heavenly focus.
Yeah. Yeah. If you hope in someone else, what are you saying about them?
They're bigger and more powerful and more everything than you are.
Yeah.
You know, you're dependent on them.
You're dependent.
For
Which is another way of saying Paul is recognizing the Lord as over. The Lord Jesus is over all that's happening.
He's in essence repeating the core of some of Jesus' words to his own Father. Your will, not mine, be done.
Exactly. That's a great way of saying it. Yeah. And so for him to start by saying, I hope in the Lord to send Timothy to you, and I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come. He's not only showing that he is dependent, Paul is dependent on the Lord's will, what the Lord wants done, but he's committing to do that. Now, we've talked about several things just in this brief passage. If we can back the camera out a little bit, the focus out, and capture what we've said, now what would you say from our discussion that this shows about or tells about what it means to be a disciple?
Someone else is first in your life.
Someone else is first in your life. You look to them for direction. You count on them. There's a sense of dependency. You are motivated by them. You act out of this relationship and your motivation to benefit them, to bless them, to do what they want done. In order to do that, what has to be the case between you and this person?
Trust.
Trust,
Commitment, love.
commitment,
understanding.
love, understanding.
Yeah.
I was looking for something that time. Understanding. How can I follow what they want if I don't know what they want? So I have to take an interest. I mean, if they specifically tell me, go and do this, well, I don't need to know a lot about it necessarily. But if they're not directing every single thing, like in this case, if Paul sends Timothy to the Philippian church, he may tell him certain things he wants him to accomplish. But surely, Timothy's going to interact with him beyond just the specific things Paul tells him to do. And he's going to be able to share with them and bless them and encourage them based on all of what he knows from Paul and his relationship to them. There's a sense in which I think from this we can take that Timothy has really gotten to know Paul well. That's how he can represent him.
It also says that Paul has let Timothy in.
It also says Paul has let Timothy in. That's exactly right. So as a disciple, you're not somebody on the outside looking in. And you're not somebody who's just pressing to get in. You've been allowed in. You've been invited in. You know, again, I go back to the whole, the athlete and the coach. You know, the young athlete, we've just come out of college football season, which I'm a big fan, you know, and I've read stories again about how young men would say, wow, my coach was instrumental in my life. He has blessed me far beyond teaching me how to play my position in this game. He's taught me how to be a man. He's taught me how to be a good person. He's helped me in my studies on academic life. He's helped me all the way around. Well, did that all come about just from the athlete? No. Obviously, the coach had to welcome that and agree to it. Now, the athlete may have pushed and pushed and pushed to get it. But more than likely, as you often hear, think about a walk-on, an athlete who didn't get a scholarship to play. The school didn't reach out and say, hey, I've got a scholarship, come play. But the student came, the athlete came and demonstrated that they were qualified enough. And the coach said, yeah, come on and play. No scholarship involved. The second story about Epaphroditus gives us some similar insight. I wonder if there's anything that strikes you in addition to what we've talked about. He says, but I think it necessary, put that in context. He's hoping, verse 23, he's hoping to send Timothy as soon as things go with me, as soon as I see how things go with me. But I think it necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he, Epaphroditus, longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. If I stop just right there, you know, obviously, that Epaphroditus was ill, that the Philippian church sent him to take care of Paul. And so what do we draw out of just those first couple of verses? What are the ways Paul describes Epaphroditus? My brother, co-worker, fellow soldier, in terms of his relationship to Paul. What does that tell you about a disciple?
Or caregiver. They take care of some of the stuff that needs to be done, but isn't all that quote unquote important.
Yeah, there's a real element of caring about the other person. The other person's needs matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
They take that on. It's not an attitude of, well, that's your issue. It's mine too now, because we're together in this. My brother, depending on relationships with brothers, you know, but it says something. In many instances, even those relationships we joke about, being a brother, there's a degree of loyalty there.
Well, it's for him to call Epaphroditus his brother is very significant, because as you referenced, you might have familial brothers.
Right.
I have 4 in my side.
Sure.
I didn't choose them.
Good point.
He chose.
Yeah.
I've got an individual in my life that I call my brother.
Good point.
I chose.
That's right. That's right.
And that's a whole different relationship as opposed to one that you were born into.
Given, so to speak. Yeah, that's exactly right. And implied in the coworker and fellow soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, and you see more of it towards the next verses when he says, God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow.
yeah.
That is a very close relationship.
Very close. You're right. You're right. And it reminds me, again, I think military, you've seen the images of a soldier standing at the graveside or at the wall where the name is written. And what that means. So it's not just a relationship of completing tasks. It's not just a relationship of what I can gain from, although it may be both of those. It's not just a relationship of being instructed to do and carried out the responsibility that you were entrusted with, although that's included. It becomes more than just a transactional or task-oriented. It becomes a very personal relationship, a very relational aspect in this connection. What else strikes you? Anything? Let me read on the rest of this little quick story. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. So then welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me. What does this say about Epaphroditus? First of all, what does it say about his level of commitment?
Pretty strong.
Pretty strong. Risked his life. What else does it say?
It, again, as he says, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. So Paul's saying, I have anxiety that Epaphroditus is here with me and not there with you.
Right.
Epaphroditus has tremendously strong feelings for the Philippian church that he came from.
That's right.
So much so that it makes Paul anxious to get him back.
That's right. That's right. And the fact that Epaphroditus left the Philippians to come to Paul, he risked his life, that last part of verse 30, he risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give me.
Well, he was with Paul, and they weren't. Is that
Right.
what he means?
Yeah. And it implies that the Philippians very much wanted to give Paul this kind of help, but they couldn't. There's a distance. They couldn't get to him. But Epaphroditus, being with him, was able to do for them what they couldn't do for themselves.
You know, those, verse 30, he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you could not give. So when he went to Paul, he went because the Philippian church,
That's right.
to go and be Paul's helper, he got sent into a dangerous situation.
Right.
He became very close to Paul
Right.
in that time frame,
Sure.
much like Timothy, you know, a fellow soldier, a brother
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting the same sense of that close relationship that they had with one another
That's right.
in serving the Lord and
Yeah.
serving God.
Yeah.
And it was dangerous.
So there's this very evident level of risk that's taken on willingly.
Yeah.
All right, now I want to back away from the scriptural story. And in the rest of our time, I want to talk about what does this say to us, to you and me, about what it means to be a disciple. If I'm trying to describe to someone, and I don't necessarily want to use the word disciple because that doesn't necessarily have meaning to them, what would I say based on stories like these? How might I describe? You know, it's one thing, let me add this one little bit in here. It's one thing to describe a position, to describe a responsibility, to describe a relationship. It's another to tell about it. In other words, to tell somebody who's really wanting to not only understand, but perhaps to be in that type of a relationship, to be that type of an individual. Is there anything in particular that strikes you?
Well, I think it's, as you use Paul as an example of a disciple of Christ, as opposed to the 11 apostles,
Okay,
who were also disciples of Christ.
sure.
But there's a big difference
Okay,
between Paul and the 11 apostles, and that difference should make an impact on us. Paul didn't walk with Christ.
right,
He didn't know him personally
correct.
at that moment,
That's right.
and he was a persecutor
Yeah,
of the way.
that's right.
So he was not a first-person viewer of Christ and all of what Christ is.
Right,
He didn't get to experience that.
that's right.
He did, of course, did get to experience getting knocked off a horse and
Yeah.
seeing a vision, etc., which most of us probably haven't. But he became so much in love with God, in love with Christ, and wanted to reflect that
Yeah,
in his life,
yeah,
that, you know, he mirrored who Christ was
that's
in
right.
most of Christ's characteristics.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for us, is, okay, how do we do that?
How do we mirror that as well?
Yeah.
One of the other things that strikes me about this story is that there really is not any talk about great accomplishments that either one of these guys did. There's really not any talk about, I mean, yes, they risked themselves. Yes, they cared deeply for someone who was in great need. But this doesn't talk about some, wow, this guy did this. That person did that. In some ways, this is just the comings and goings of life between Paul and a church, some friends of his in another place, and the people that were connected to them. When I listen to this and I back up and I think in today, I think, okay, you know, there's a group of people that I knew in one of the places we used to live. And, you know, they cared for me a lot when I was with them. And I cared for them a lot when I was with them. But I'm not with them anymore. I'm not even close. We're several states away. Did the relationship end? No. What connection is still involved? Well, some have come to visit. I've stayed in connection through electronic means. What impact or what evidence would be that that relationship is still present? that relationship is still meaningful.
Well, the fact that you do still stay in touch.
The fact that we,
If they didn't count for anything, you wouldn't bother.
Right.
And vice versa.
that's right. Yeah. And you can play that out in additional ways in a relationship like this where there is not just a separation now, but if there was the deep concern that I had for that former group of people, not only would I be receiving people checking on me, I would be interested in checking on them. It's a relationship that impacts not just for the moment, but down the road. Anything else? Well, let me conclude by saying that as you think about what it means to be a disciple, as you think about it in your own life, in your relationship with the Lord, or as you think about it in relationship to someone else, that maybe you're trying to help them understand what it means. You don't just have a conceptual conversation. You don't have just a textbook answer. You have real life relational experiences to share. You have real life concerns to share. You have values that you both hold and that get played out in life. So as I'm trying to think, what does this mean? I might use real life examples. I might not try to define the term. I might just talk about what it looks like and how it gets lived out. Paul is a great example to study, and the book of Philippians is great to study because there's a lot in this short letter about the deep impact of their relationship, not only on his life, but on their lives, and how that gets played out in the way they live. Well, we'll talk more about what it looks like to be a disciple, and in particular, what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. Lord, I pray that as we study